and God down. Every Jew has been impacted by anti-Semitism or knows someone who has. Anti-Semitism has been increasingly creeping into every aspect of our lives. Anti-Semites want to erase Jewish history. Simchat Torah, October the 7th, 2023, was the bloodiest day in Israel's history and the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. Hamas attacked Israel to slaughter Jews and destroy the Jewish state. The Hamas covenant claims that there will be a day when all Jews will be killed, eradicated, exterminated. This was a pogrom all over again, the ultimate expression of anti-Semitism, which anti-Semites believe that Jews are different, the other, that we need to be eradicated. Anti-Semitism has been around for more than 2,000 years, and I'm going to demonstrate that. We are not going to cure it. It is an inborn disease. It is ubiquitous. We are each asking, what can we do about it? Especially at a time when 25% of Americans endorse anti-Semitic tropes, ancient ones, mostly younger people, and that most are based on double standards and conspiracy theories. First, it is imperative that we educate ourselves so that we can recognize it and know what we are fighting for. Anti-Semitism is a lack of moral clarity and critical thinking. It comes from everywhere on the political spectrum. It comes from the left and the right, from Christians, Muslims, atheists, even sometimes Jews. The media, internet, and social media have caused so much misinformation to erupt into the public square like a burst sewage pipe. The template used against Jews is always the same. Jews are all powerful, all wealthy, conniving, evil, devils, and tricky. We work behind the scenes and have dual loyalty. You've heard them all. We see anti-Semitism in music, film, sports, at work, on campus, and constantly in the news globally. The reality is that anti-Semitism has become normalized and fashionable. Jews represent just 2.4% of the US population and less than a quarter of 1% globally. Yet much of the world thinks that everything Jews do is wrong and that all wrongs are done by Jews. The American Jewish Committee reports that 78% of American Jews feel less safe than they did prior to October 7th, and 93% think that anti-Semitism is a problem. This hatred for Jews is a political movement to deny Jews any civil and political rights. It appears as rhetoric, bigotry, discrimination, and violence. It has intellectual underpinnings based on Christianity, conspiracy theories, and or scientific racism, and I will show you examples of each. Rabbi, my slides, oh, there they go, okay. Anti-Semitism is a prejudice. Jews are prejudged. The categories of anti-Semitism are on the screen before you. The classic anti-Semitic stereotypes, the myths and the tropes, the positive references to or promotion of known anti-Semitic personalities, QAnon, which has been around since 2017, that espouses conspiracy theories, including Holocaust denial, epithets used for Jews like kike, which is really is not a slur. It's Yiddish for little circle, as some of you might know. When Jews came to Ellis Island, if they could not write their name, they used a circle to denote their signature. They refused to use the X because to them it represented the cross of Christianity. Many thought that the hatred for Jews was in the past. We were not prepared for the current onslaught. We have been forced back into Jewish history, into the bloody, raw part of that Jewish history. We Jews have had to transition to vigilante action. It is critical to stay informed and speak up, speak out when you see anti-Semitism. Most anti-Semitism is based, as I said, on conspiracy theories where blood libels from medieval times take on new forms today. We saw it after October the 7th when accusations of Israel's genocide in Gaza, unverified numbers of civilian deaths in Gaza by Israelis, and the famine in Gaza, allegedly caused by Israel. All lies perpetuated by the media. During this summer's Olympics, we heard the phrase Israeli athletes swim in blood, walk on blood, and breathe with blood. The old myths and tropes about Jews continue to creep into current events. One is that powerful Jews control the banks. This comes from Shakespeare's 16th century Merchant of Venice and the role of the greedy moneylender Shylock, who literally demands a pound of flesh for a repayment of a loan. Although Shakespeare wrote The Merchant of Venice in 1597, a time when Jews were not even allowed to live in England, he based Shylock on earlier medieval stereotypes, linking Jews with money and power. Shylock's large hook nose depicts Jews as animal-like and greedy, and has since become a defining and persisting element of the Jewish stereotype that has been exploited in political propaganda, cartoons, artworks, and on social media, as I will demonstrate. The publicity for the recent film Maestro featured criticism about Bradley Cooper's use of a prosthetic nose for his portrayal of Leonard Bernstein, a proud Jew, calling it Jew face and fueling anti-Semitic stereotypes on social media. Focusing on just one aspect of anti-Semitism, double standards. The United States lost 3,000 people in the 9/11 terrorist attack. We scorched the earth to destroy al-Qaeda. The 1,200 plus casualties Israel suffered would be equivalent to 45,000 people in the United States. Can you imagine what the response would have been by the United States if we lost 45,000 people in a terrorist attack? I encountered personally this huge protest in New York City, and it was frightening. 85% of American Jews between the ages of 18 and 29 have experienced anti-Semitism online, but support the Palestinians' humanitarian plight and want Israel to stop the war, to stop defending Jews. Many of our young people lack the depth and knowledge of Jewish history. Israel is at war against generations of Jew hatred. The current anti-Zionist hatred is a result of canceling our long history of the reality of Jews living in what is now Israel since the first recorded arrival and accepting the UN partition plan for statehood in 1947 when the Palestinians did not accept it. They have turned down the opportunity to have their own state 8 times, and now they want all the land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea with no Israel, no Jews. Anti-Zionism rejects Israel's right to exist as a Jewish nation. What we are hearing from around the globe, plain and simple, Jews have no right to exist. Launched in 2005, BDS, Boycott, Divest, Sanction, opposes Zionism. BDS works to economically boycott Israel and end international support for what they call Israel's oppression of Palestinians, with the goal of eliminating Israel entirely. This progressive rhetoric and anti-Israel statements, like Israelis are worse than Hitler, have contributed to the hostile college and university campus atmosphere Jewish students face today, when support for Israel as a Jewish homeland is an important component of being Jewish. Supporting Israel does not mean all Jews support their government's policies, which is the same for being an American. Not all of us support our government's decisions, and that does not make us anti-American. The recent violence against Israeli soccer fans in Amsterdam was a premeditated and coordinated attack. Hundreds of Tel Aviv soccer fans who were visiting the Dutch capital for a game against the local team were attacked by Arab and Muslim mobs. Attackers threw firecrackers and stun grenades, calling for a Jew hunt and forcing Israelis to say, "Free Palestine," before beating them up. The pogrom contagion spreading across Europe is no accident. Terror-linked actors are deliberately weaponizing gatherings and social media to accelerate the spread of violence against Jewish communities. This infrastructure of hate is evolving faster than democratic defenses, and left unchecked, these threats multiply across both borders and ethnicities. Jewish Londoners are scared to leave their homes. There is an explosion of anti-Semitism unlike anything seen since World War II. Last week, a group of Jewish girls were pelted with glass bottles. The problem is so serious that city officials in London created a new bus route to help Jewish residents feel safe when they travel. This week, leaflets threaten that every Zionist needs to leave Britain or be slaughtered. Here in the United States, Jewish government officials are targeted with anti Semitic attacks, hampering efforts to help hurricane victims. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, Asheville Mayor Esther Mannheimer, and the Jewish spokesperson for FEMA were each subjected to anti Semitic abuse while doing their jobs. Conspiracy slogans like lying Jews, Jews control the weather, Mossad is delivering supplies, and Jews are stealing our supplies sow distrust in our government and our democracy. As just one example of thousands of incidents across our country and our campuses, an act of Jew hatred by the Students for Justice for Palestine occurred during a presentation to Hillel students by IDF soldiers describing the barbarous events of October the 7th. Jewish students say they are called genocide supporters, among other worse anti Semitic slurs during their daily campus lives, and ask, how can they be safe? Campus anti Semitism is rampant across the nation and is affecting Jewish high school students' college enrollment decisions right now. The campus anti Israel protests were at 60 of the 1,000 US campuses, mostly at elite universities like Stanford, Berkeley, Yale, Penn, Harvard, and Columbia, with bigotry, institutional paralysis, and mayhem. Jewish students have been saying for quite some time that they felt increasingly isolated. Even prior to the Israeli Hamas war on college campuses, it was hard to keep up with the surreal anti Semitic acts. They are mostly incited by the presence of an active Students for Justice for Palestine, or SJP, groups, and they trend for professors fueled by tens of billions of dollars of Arab petrodollars to espouse hate against Jewish students and Israel. They teach about Israel with apartheid, colonialist, racist, and blood libel theories in Middle East studies curriculum. The Israel Hamas war intensified the already inflamed campuses and raised fears of anti Semitism geometrically more. If a student's educational mission is disrupted, like if they can't go to class, that is a violation of the First Amendment and anti Semitism. By summer of 2024, the heads of 4 of the 8 Ivy League schools had resigned in the wake of October 7th controversies because they did not protect Jewish students as they would other students, and there are lawsuits pending right now. Currently, there are more than 100 attacks on Hillels right now. Calls for universities to defund or disassociate centers for Jewish life on campus are rampant nationwide amid the anti-Israel encampment movement. This includes calls for boycotts of dual degree programs with universities in Israel. In the United States, you have a constitutionally protected right to say whatever you want, no matter how hateful. But the First Amendment does not give anyone a right to threaten and harm people. You don't have a right to targeted harassment or intimidation, particularly on the basis of somebody's religious affiliation. Actual violence is not protected. The problem that causes Jewish students to feel threatened is uneven enforcement of university codes of conduct and of the First Amendment. The White House says it's taking action to fight an alarming uptick in these incidents and clarifying that Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act bans certain forms of anti Semitism. Public universities could actually lose their funding if Jewish students are not protected. There needs to be a commitment to a pluralistic democracy at schools. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is intended to support different races, ethnicities, religions, abilities, genders, and sexual orientations. The campus issues is that they do not know what to do with Jews. DEI does not address anti Semitism or anti Zionism. They are the same. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. DEI was originally tied to Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, but it is based on Black, Asian American, and Native Americans. Jewish students became eligible for Title VI protection only in 2004, and anti Semitism is still not integrated into DEI initiatives because Jews are no longer underrepresented in higher education, so not viewed as oppressed. We are seen as white and privileged and oppressors due to the connection to Israel, and many DEI staff are anti Semitic themselves, virulently anti Israel, and support the Palestinians. So, this is why Jewish students feel isolated. American Jews want to live freely and safely without fear of harassment simply because they are Jews. That's all we want. The message is unity. Do not cower. Allow no one to make you afraid at a time when Hamas is calling for the eradication of Israel and of all Jews everywhere. There is a large bigoted faction in the United States that believes we should be a Christian nation. God and Country, the film, allows the history and follows the history and recent activities of Christian nationalism. The belief that the United States is ordained by God to be a white Christian nation and that this should influence U.S. policies on abortion, public education, immigration, and so on. Their incendiary preachers tell their congregations, if you vote Democrat, I don't even want you around this church. You can get out, you demon. If you can get out, you can get out right now, you baby butcher and election thief. This is what they're quoted as saying. About 30 million people support hate groups around the nation. The Southern Poverty Law Center identifies 1,430 active hate groups in the United States. The security of the American Jewish community is threatened by modern versions of age-old ideas that Jews are different, are devils conspiring to control the world, and harvesting the blood of Gentile children for rituals. Racism and hate crimes are on the rise for many other groups, Blacks, Asians, women, and Central American immigrants, for example, where the Great Replacement Theory, or GRT, embraces the idea that Jews are actually orchestrating a campaign to replace white people with people of color because the latter are impotent to do this themselves. And the US Census predicts that white people will become a minority by 2045. Elon Musk espouses the GRT on his Twitter. Of the 114 hate groups in Florida, most are white supremacy groups, like those involved in the insurrection at the US Capitol in January of 2021. Florida is home to the most people charged in connection with the January 6th insurrection. These hate groups include white nationalist groups such as Patriot Front and the Proud Boys. We have seen a huge rise in fascist activity. Neo-Nazis taking to the streets, waving swastikas and chanting, "The Jew is the devil," and "Jews rape children and drink their blood." Hate propaganda is all around us with continuous assault, especially on Jews, but also against Blacks and other minorities. To purify a race, the National Socialist Movement advocates an America in which only those with white, Northern European, or Nordic or Aryan ancestry can be citizens, harkening back to the US laws of murdering Indians, then forcing survivors onto reservations, and slavery, and Jim Crow, and immigration quotas. Nordic relates to the Germanic peoples of Northern Europe, featuring tall stature, long head, light skin and hair, and blue eyes. Detailed in Isabel Wilkerson's book Caste, eugenics became a popular social movement peaking in the 1920s and 30s here in the United States. Hitler was emboldened by America's eugenics replacement theory, a set of beliefs aimed at improving the genetic quality of the human population and eliminating so-called social ills or undesirables. Hitler advocated selective breeding of Aryan traits beginning in 1933. He defined the Aryan race as non-Jewish whites, deemed them superior to all other races, and began his campaign to dehumanize all subhumans, a category that, of course, included Jews. We saw these replacement theory people in Charlottesville, white supremacists marching while chanting, "Jews will not replace us," and the 11 Jews murdered in the Pittsburgh synagogue in 2018 are bold reaffirmations of the centuries-old replacement theory. And we saw these people on January the 6th, 2021. The toxic blend of ethno-religious identity politics reflected in the religious symbols that participants carried. Our politics are animated by two conflicting moral issues. Is America a divinely ordained promised land for European Christians? Or is America a pluralistic democracy where all stand on equal footing as citizens? There is a parallel between the ancient forces of xenophobia that drove Jews out of 109 countries and that prevented them from residing in Florida for 250 years after settlement began, and from some cities in modern history, and what is happening today. The current uncontrolled anti-Semitism makes us wonder if the Gaza war caused the new eruption or whether it uncorked the flow of ancient hatred. I wrote a book on the Jews of Florida. I trekked 250,000 miles around the Sunshine State over 8 years to unearth the hidden history. I had to learn the historical context in Florida history to present the Jewish history, and I discovered a story of discrimination. Did you know that 500 years ago, in 1513, when Ponce de Leon discovered Florida, only Catholics could settle here? Because Ponce de Leon sailed for Spain, Spain became the owner of Florida. That was during the Inquisition, so only Catholics could live in Florida for the next 250 years. This is anti-Semitism, hatred for Jews. Jews were allowed to settle in Florida in 1763. That is when the Treaty of Paris was signed, following the 7 years or French and Indian War. In this treaty, Spain ceded Florida to Britain, and people other than Catholics could finally settle, including Jews. But there was still much anti-Semitism. I could do an entire lecture just on anti-Semitism on Miami Beach. For example, the reason the Beth Jacobs Synagogue that became the Jewish Museum of Florida is on 3rd Street is because when Miami Beach became a city in 1915, Jews were not allowed to settle north of 5th Street due to restrictive deeds. Most scholars agree that anti-Semitism goes back to the beginning of the church 2,000 years ago and to the time of medieval blood libels and plagues in Europe when Jews were blamed. Like COVID-19, anti-Semitism is a virus that mutates. We've seen a tsunami of anti-Semitic hatred, especially on the internet and social media, that falsely blame Jews for having invented COVID, for intentionally spreading it, profiting from it, or using it as a tool for global control. This lurid caricature of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken uses the fact that Blinken is Jewish and a stepson of a Holocaust survivor. Throughout history, anti-Semites have used overt tropes like enlarged noses, horns that portray the devil, and accusations of global control to sway the public against Jews. Here, wearing a flag of the United States as a cape and clutching a COVID report, it implies that the Jews started COVID. Of course, this feeds into anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, like those anti-Semitic flyers that were distributed heavily in Florida, proclaiming COVID to be a Jewish plot, and emblazoned with the Star of David and red pentagram, which is a reference to Satanism. The distribution that began in 2021 is executed by a neo-Nazi group that promotes anti-Semitic COVID-19 conspiracy theories and Holocaust denial, using the Jewish control of the world theme. The latest campaigns directly target Zionist or Jewish-owned businesses or individuals that boycott, divest, sanction BDS activists believe are complicit in Israel's military response to Hamas. This is anti-Semitism. BDS activists are very currently, right now, intensifying calls for action against new targets such as McDonald's, Disney, and Starbucks for their support of Israel. The fantasy about Jewish power is pervasive. It's anti-Semitism. It's All About the Benjamin is boasted by rapper Puff Daddy and U.S. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, referencing Benjamin Franklin on the $100 bill and insinuating that Israel gets support from Congress because of the pro-Israel lobby AIPAC. The real reason is that Israel is a democratic ally with shared values, military development, intelligence systems in a dangerous part of the world. The reality is that AIPAC ranks 20th on the list of congressional donors, giving away a paltry 4.5 million compared to the 95 million that retiree interest groups donate. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, chief rabbi of England from 1991 to 2013, said, "In the Middle Ages, Jews were hated for their religion. In the 19th and early 20th century, we were hated for our race. In our time, Jews are hated for our nation state, Israel, which is anti-Semitism, which is anti-Zionism." Why are we hated? No, Israel is not a European colonial state. Only 30% of Israel's population is European origin, and they were not colonialists. Endless pieces of archaeological evidence show that Jewish people are indigenous to Israel and have lived there for more than 3,000 years. Jewish presence in Israel preceded Muslim presence by at least 1 millennium. The late Charles Krauthammer said, and I quote, "Israel is the very embodiment of Jewish continuity. It is the only nation on earth that inhabits the same land, bears the same name, speaks the same language, and worships the same God it did 3,000 years ago." Quote, unquote. No, Israel is not a racist or apartheid state. Arabs represent 20% of Israel's citizens and have equal rights. They are part of the Knesset and the Supreme Court. They have notable presence in universities, hospitals, and the entertainment industry. Arabs who have Israeli citizenship have more rights and opportunities in Israel than they would have as citizens in any Arab country in the world. No, Israel does not engage in ethnic cleansing. In 1948, the Arab population in Israel was 156,000 in 1948. Today, it is over 2 million. Conversely, in 1948, the Jewish population in Muslim countries was close to 1 million. Today, it is under 12,000. No, the Jewish people are not a privileged group. For 2,500 years, Jews in Europe and Northern Africa were persecuted wherever they lived, facing expulsions, pogroms, and genocide. Palestinians are Arabs. The Arab League is comprised of 21 Arab states representing 650 million people over an area of 5 million square miles. Israel has about 7 million Jews and less than 10,000 square miles, including Judah, Samaria, and the Golan. So the Arabs are 100 times as numerous as the number of Israeli Jews and spread over an area 500 times the size of Israel, which is the size of New Jersey. There are more than 50 Muslim-oriented countries, among them 27 that are officially Muslim. They and much of the world rejects one Jewish state. If you are faced with anti-Semitism, ask any anti-Zionist this question: why are the Palestinian Arabs entitled to a separate land when the Jews are not? Why have none of these Arab or Muslim states taken in their brother Palestinians since 1948, when their leaders told them before Israel's War of Independence, "Leave Palestine and you will return when the Jews have been pushed into the sea"? You've heard this. Anti-Jew and anti-Israel teaching in Palestinian schools is a continuing problem. Even after the Oslo Accords 31 years ago, children are still taught to hate Israel, to hate Jews, and eliminate Israel. That is not even on their maps. Each generation since Israel became a state in 1948 has been taught misinformation about Jews and the Zionist state that they neighbor. This is what fueled the Hamas attack on the citizens of Israel on October the 7th. Another element of anti-Semitism is Holocaust denial. The odious contention that Hitler didn't arrange the murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others in his quest for racial purity. In Florida, since 1994, there has been a mandate to teach about the Holocaust. 60% of Americans cannot name one concentration camp and do not know how many Jews perished in the Holocaust. 2/3 of millennials in the United States do not know what Auschwitz is. But Florida Governor DeSantis also enables parents to remove Holocaust literature that they don't like from school libraries, which they have done. These are all threats to Jews, but this is not just about Jews. The threats to Jews have always been the canary in the coal mine, a warning that society is breaking down and every minority group is at risk. In 1946, German Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller said it best, and I quote, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Many books, films, and plays continue to be written about anti-Semitism. Jew hatred is the most persistent, pervasive, and pernicious of all hatreds known in the world. Why? How did it begin? In 1936, Swedish author Hugo Valentin wrote, and I quote, "It is not the Jews who are hated, but an imaginary image of them," end quote. An example of this happened after my daughter was born. In 1967, I was living in Orlando and went on my first outing in the neighborhood with my infant daughter. My friend next door, an educated woman, rushed out and said, "Oh, I've always been so eager to see Jewish babies because I've been always heard that Jews are born with horns, with Jews were born with," it's so hard for me to say this, I'm sorry, but I've always heard that Jews are born with horns. That's why I'm so eager to see your baby. Can I see the horns?" This actually happened. This myth originates with the most important finished piece of sculpture of Michelangelo, his 1513 marble statue of Moses after receiving the Ten Commandments from God. At the time this statue was completed, the Catholic Church had just declared the 4th century Latin translation of the Hebrew Bible as the standard edition for Christians. St. Jerome had translated the Hebrew term keren, meaning ray of light, as horn. The social position of Jews and their depictions in Christian art had become increasingly negative since the 11th century and reached a low point in the 16th century. Jews were identified with the devil and were commonly depicted with horns because of this origin, which is a slanderous stereotype that exists to this day. The current uncontrolled anti-Semitism makes us wonder if the Gaza war caused the new eruption or whether it uncorked the flow of ancient hatred, as I said earlier. Why this hatred of Jews? The materials I am sharing with you are organized to illustrate, one, that anti-Semitism is not a monolithic, inflexible set of ideas that transfers from one generation to another. Indeed, among the secrets that explain the uncanny longevity of this form of hatred is its ability to adapt to widely divergent social conditions. It is a virus that mutates from generation to generation. And number two, the power of imagery and social media are used in communicating the agenda of hatred. We live in an intensely visual age. Our worldview is unconsciously shaped by powerful media and advertising engines. Anti-Semitism should be spelled as one word with a small s and no hyphen. I am proud to claim that I initiated a national discussion in dozens of editorial meetings about this in the past few years, and I've been very successful. This spelling is rational. There is no such thing as Semitism. To be anti, I'll repeat that. There is no such thing as Semitism to be anti. German Wilhelm Marr created the term in 1879, the same year he promoted the promise that all Jews must be removed by force from Germany, as they were a threat. Marr argued that there exists a Jewish conspiracy to take over the world called Semitism that was ardently opposed by his followers, the anti Semites. Absurd. Jews were never plotting to take over the world. Semitic refers to a family of languages originating in the Middle East, whose descendant languages today are spoken by millions of people, mostly across Western Asia and North Africa. These people are not necessarily anti Semitic, but following Marr's logic, the conjunction of the prefix anti with Semitism indicates anti Semitism as referring to all people who speak Semitic languages. Also absurd. Anti Semitism has always meant plain and simple Jew hatred. Jew hatred was present in the ancient world, including Greco Roman persecutions and the Babylonian exile. Purim is a story of anti Semitism going back to the 4th century BCE, which was at the end of the exile period. Because Jews were different, the Persians wanted to annihilate the Jewish people, just as Hamas does today, 2,000 years later. Let's examine how the world's response to Jews has evolved. Anti Semitism finds its most sustained roots in Christianity. Before Christianity, there was a xenophobia or fear of anyone who was different. Jews were seen as different because they did not worship pagan idols. They worshiped a God that could not be seen at all. How strange is that? Jews ate differently and had different rituals, like circumcision for newborn males, but they were not persecuted or slaughtered for their difference. I want to emphasize that. This did not cause them to be slaughtered. Anti Jewish sentiment gained steam as Christianity started because of the deicide charge that Jews killed Jesus. Roman Catholic author Malcolm Hay wrote 70 years ago, and I quote, "The Holocaust would have been impossible had it not been for the poisonous lies with which the church have infected Christian populations for 2,000 years," end quote. Most current scholars and Christian theologians today contend that anti Semitism came with Christianity. In addition to the claim of Christians that Jews were responsible to the death of Jesus, it was also the reality that most Jews did not accept the new version of religion, Christianity. This created hatred between the church and the synagogue. Christianity attacked Judaism, but Judaism did not disappear and, in fact, regained its vitality in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, posing a challenge to Christianity. All Jewish misfortunes are blamed on the fact that the Jews did not accept Jesus as their God. Today, many Americans still believe the Jews killed Jesus as a result of preaching and artworks that I'm going to show you. The rivalry between Jews and Christianity, Judaism and Christianity, intensified as each competed for followers. For the 1,000 years prior to the First Crusade, the church's attacks continued against Judaism. A contemporary example can be illustrated with cars. Your family has been driving Fords for generations, and the 18-year-old buys a Toyota, instigating an argument that the teenager should have bought a Ford. The teen has to go on the defensive and say all the great things about the Toyota and why Ford is really bad, unreliable, more costly, more difficult to repair, and so forth. The same arguments go on today about iPhones and Androids. One puts down the other to make a case. When Christianity was born, it viewed itself as an improved version of Judaism, like an upgraded version of your computer software after the bugs were worked out. All of the problems get referred to the earlier version, be it the model of car, phone, computer, or religion. In this case, all the ills were blamed on Judaism. Our concepts of heaven and hell are derived from artworks. In the same way, the concept of Christian hatred of the Jews was also derived from artworks. Like the song in South Pacific, you have to be taught to hate. And the teaching was done through degenerate art. The images I show you were created to make people believe the Jews are the others. Jews are different, hateful, despicable, devils, even evil insects. This illustration is called the scourging of Jesus. One reason often given for anti-Semitism is that Jews rejected and killed Jesus. Although the Christian Bible says that the Romans are responsible for Jesus' death by crucifixion, this 13th century artwork illustrates that the Jews killed Jesus. Note the peaked hats on the men, which was a symbol that these men were Jewish, which was a requirement by the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, so that the Jews could be identified outside the ghetto. You will see these peaked hats in many of the illustrations that I'm going to show you. The Christian Bible says Jews were accomplices, yet the accomplices are persecuted throughout history and not the Romans, who were the actual killers of Jesus. Of course, it makes no sense. The Second Vatican Council in 1963 officially exonerated the Jews as the killers of Jesus, and yet this has not lessened anti-Semitism. For example, the accusation of Jews as Christ killers has been recycled by today's anti-Zionists who compare the murder of Jesus to Palestinians, who they falsely claimed are crucified by the Israeli Defense Forces or the Israeli government. Throughout the medieval period, which was the 5th to the 15th centuries, these images portray the replacement theological doctrine of election of the 1400s, which says that Jews are no longer the chosen people of God and have been replaced by the Christians. Here, in this illustration, Church is lovingly supervising the burial of her predecessor, the synagogue. The relationship between Judaism and Christianity is expressed as one of clear succession. Still wearing the crown, depicting her prior sovereignty and holding on to the two tablets of the law, Judaism is dead. You see her in the casket, and her place is taken by Christianity. There have been 2,000 years of biblical illiteracy called replacement theology. There's a whole lecture that could be done on replacement theology. Christians believe that what they hear in church, it is in their DNA to believe that God is finished with the Jews. The Jews are damned because the Jews killed Jesus and don't believe in Jesus as a divine being, an intermediary between humans and God, a Messiah or holy. The exception is the evangelical movement that is faithful to scriptures where Israel has a role. Many Christians are influenced by the lies and conspiracy theories that I have mentioned. Jews have been considered too powerful, and many express concern for the underdog, even though the Jews have been the most persecuted people for the longest period of time. Again, makes no sense. The reasons for this are one, many Christians are ignorant of the purpose of terrorist organizations, which is to eliminate the state of Israel and all Jews, and two, bad theology. Preachers have taught that God is finished with the Jews, period. This is an elegant medieval example that hangs in a museum in Bruges, Belgium. It's called Ecclesiaza et Synagoga, church and synagogue. And it communicates the New Testament's complex Pauline doctrine of election that argued for the church's inheritance of the divine favor originally given to the Jewish people. The figures reflect the Christian belief that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah, and that once Christianity was established, Judaism as a religion was therefore made unnecessary, and that all Jews should convert. On the left, depicting the church, you see a lady, very dignified, confident, crown, holding the Holy Grail with an intact staff. On the right is the synagogue, another female figure in an aspect of decline, representing the synagogue. The two tablets of the law fall from her hand. The battered staff, representing her sovereignty, is broken, and the blindfold prevents her from perceiving Christian truth. Each of the details was especially useful in expressing the nuances of the doctrine of election to illiterate peasants and is repeated hundreds and hundreds of times in European art. This image that is hanging in St. John's Church in Verben, Germany today portrays the supplanting of Judaism by Christianity in a far more violent manner. On the left, the church is portrayed in the conventional pose of dignity, riding on a majestic mythical animal representing the Gospels and being crowned by the heavenly hand of God. On the right is synagogue, representing a mere donkey with a bloodied sword being driven through her head, cutting off Judaism from God. She loses her crown while she holds fast to a slaughtered ram's head, which is symbolic of the so-called carnal nature of Judaism. In 2019, the world was transfixed on the images of flames and smoke spewing from the burning roof of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. This religious icon dates from the 12th century, when Jews were expelled from France. Even so, we know what special garments the Jews in Paris were wearing at the time they were allowed, because they are shown in many of the friezes, wearing tall, pointy hats to identify them. Two prominent statues on the facade of Notre Dame captured the feelings of Christians and Jews when construction began in 1163. It was opened in 1345, 861 years ago. On the right is the synagogue. The Jewess stands ragged, defeated. Her eyes are covered by a snake and her head is bowed, so she cannot see clearly because she has not accepted Christianity. She holds again a broken scepter, and the tablets of law are slipping from her hand. Under her feet lies a crown trodden in the dust. The Catholic Church wanted those entering Notre Dame, this is right over the entrance, wanted those entering Notre Dame to believe that Judaism was finished, humiliated. On the left is the victorious Catholic Church, Ecclesia, a finely dressed, triumphant woman carrying a chalice and a staff with a cross. So important were these allegories of Christian dominance and Jewish humiliation that when the originals were destroyed during the French Revolution, they were recreated and replaced in the 1800s. Notre Dame has been restored for $81 billion and is actually set to reopen this weekend when they expect 40,000 visitors a day. In the 12th century, anti-Semitism gained momentum when the blood libel, invented in England in 1144, spread rapidly throughout Europe. The blood libels were a central component in the development of modern anti-Semitism in the 19th century. The blood libels were, the church spread the blood libels, the claim that the Jews needed to recapture innocent Christian children to reenact the crucifixion of Jesus, that the Jews kill the Gentile children and drain their blood to use it for religious purposes, like to make matzahs for Passover. This 1475 woodcut depicts Jews abducting Simon of Trent and draining his blood. Of course, the idea is absurd, not least because the tiniest speck of blood in food renders it inedible in kosher in Jewish law. Notice that each of the Jews is labeled with a name on their traditional Jewish peaked hat. The conclusion of the blood libel trial was often the massacre of an entire Jewish community. Here, Jews identified again by their Jewish peaked hat of the Middle Ages are bound naked to wheels and set aside as Christian priests look on. Blood libel was combined with the allegations of well poisoning by Jews during the time of the Black Death in the middle of the 14th century. By the 15th century, the motif was very commonplace throughout Western and Central Europe. In these times, during the Israel-Hamas war, a rocket fired by Hamas from Gaza toward Israel fell short after launching, you probably remember that, and hit the hospital next to the rocket launcher in Gaza City, killing 500 of their own people. Of course, Israel's blame, calling out blood libel by the international press. The Arabs continue to spread the libel of Jews killing Christian children to use their blood for matzah. In 1986, the Syrian defense minister embraced in his book, Matzah of Zion, where he argues that the children of Israel have the holiday of Passover, when Jews look for a small child, kidnap and conceal him, bring a barrel called the barrel of nails. They would put the small child in the barrel, and his body would be pierced by these nails. He goes in very detail and explains it. And then the devil demanded of the Jews, they said, and as a result, no Arab country should ever sign a peace treaty with Israel. In 1991, very recently, Matzah of Zion was translated into English and spread and praised at the UN Human Rights Commission as a valuable book that unmasks the racist, murderous character of Zionism. In 1517, Martin Luther launched the Protestant Reformation, but when he failed to convert many Jews, his agitation morphed into hatred. He said, and I quote, "Their synagogues, prayer books, and houses should be set on fire, and what does not burn must be covered over with earth, so that no man will ever see stone or cinder of them again." End quote. In this environment, anti-Semitic tropes were expressed through art like this medieval folk image. This is actually the most obnoxious one that I found in all my research. It recently was posted near the Rothschild home in Frankfurt. Recently, current times, called Judensau, which is German for Jew's sow or female pig. It is an image of Jews on their knees, suckling the pig's teats, and a rabbi with his tongue thrust into the anus of the pig. So disgusting. And its popularity has lasted over 1,000 years, up to today. Notice the Jew devil is there, identified by the round badge mandated for Jews to wear from the early 13th century. There are at least 50 of these Judenstyle sculptures in Germany today and more throughout Europe. An old fear of Jewish domination, now promoted by QAnon, is the public scorning of the Rothschilds, a German Jewish banking family from the 18th century. Here, Lord Rothschild is portrayed as a monster controlling the entire world. He is crowned by a pig representing hypocrisy, since Judaism prohibits the eating of pork. This conspiracy theory has lasted a long time. Even with the Rothschild fortune greatly declined today, QAnon Rothschild conspiracy theories abound, based on prejudice and our anti-Semitism. In 2021, during the California wildfires, there was speculation that a space-based solar generator used a clean energy experiment with the goal of replacing coal and oil, beamed the sun's energy back to Earth and started a fire, and that it was the Rothschilds, of course, who caused this to happen. Anti-conspiracy theorists claim that the Rothschilds interfered with the American Revolution, financed Nazism and the Bolshevik Revolution, perpetrated the 9/11 attacks, and caused the disappearance of Malaysia Flight 370 in 2014. Of course, all absurd. Another popular Christian folklore was the legend of the wandering Jew that spread in the 13th century and continues today. According to one legend, a Jew mocked Jesus on the cross and was thus cursed with eternal life, requiring him to wander with no rest or death, awaiting the second coming of Jesus. Another explanation is that Christianity felt constraints about exterminating the very people from whom they had taken the best of their teachings, and so there is a doctrine asserting that Judaism is to be preserved until the end of time as witnesses to the truth of Christianity. Very convoluted. Discrimination based on physical characteristics is usually attributed to Hitler. But here in the United States, racism was taking place much earlier. This illustration is titled Hints for the Jews, Several Ways of Getting to Manhattan Beach, which was in Coney Island. And this illustration is from Puck Magazine, printed in New York, on July 30th, 1879. This is an example of the use of racism, the belief that people can be divided into groups based on what they look like and that their appearances define how they think and their morality. Jews are depicted with, again, with big noses, dark kinky hair, jewelry to show off, and so forth. This belief led to restrictive laws of public accommodation in housing, employment, school and club admissions, restrictions, and much more today. The 1894 Dreyfus case in France birthed both modern anti-Semitism and crusading journalism with mass protest. Alfred Dreyfus, a French Jewish army intelligence officer, was arrested, tried, and convicted of being a spy. There was absolutely no evidence against him. This trumped up charge was clearly anti-Semitism, and it awakened fear in all Jews. It took 12 years of social turmoil, violence, and lobbying for him to be cleared. It was not until 2006, 112 years later, that the president of France issued a formal apology and stated that Dreyfus was a loyal officer. That same French newspaper is depicting world Jewish conspiracy, Semitism, to dominate the world. Note the bulbous nose that continuously appears as the stereotype of a Jew. A turning point in the history of European anti-Semitism was the publication in 1903 by Sergei Nilis of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the most notorious and widely distributed anti-Semitic publication. This Russian monk claimed to have discovered the minutes of the secret meeting of a fictitious Jewish government that was planning to take over the world, dominate the world. Although repeatedly exposed as a forgery, the protocols became one of Hitler's favorite texts and the pretext for the Holocaust. This image, based on the protocols and reproduced in a 1921 Austrian magazine, depicts the Jew as a multifaceted monster controlling the world. The mushroom that sprouts from the globe symbolizes the ultimate decay that will result of Jewish dominance. The forgery was introduced into the Arab countries in the 1930s and continues to provoke unprecedented popularity, reprinted and translated into dozens of languages. On the left is a version printed in Great Britain in 1978, and on the right is a French version printed in 1934. The forgery continues to appeal to anti-Semites in the 21st century all over the world. Barnes and Nobles had this display of various versions of the Protocols of Zion on its website until January of 2022. We should demand that every online platform stop selling any book called A Warrant for Genocide. Vote Christian Socialist German Christians, Save Austria. Interwar German anti-Semitism held Jews responsible for their defeat in World War I. As Jews gained greater prominence through achievements in the arts and sciences, they were perceived to be strangling German culture, as depicted here. This German book cover around 1920 again illustrates the Jews as agents of decay. It depicts the Jew as a vulture, weighing down a beaten Aryan figure, waiting for his death to have his meal, and refers to the racial defilement of the German people through the infiltration of Jews into their society. This is an German election poster signed AH in 1920. This was supposedly drawn by Adolf Hitler. Note the initials. Before his order to murder millions of innocent individuals, Adolf Hitler was an unsuccessful artist. This image carries the idea of the pure Aryan woman marrying a Jew. You see below the figures, a coffin symbolizing the decline of the white race. The swastika on the upper left suggests the early interpretation of the swastika, which was used nearly 5,000 years ago in India in Sanskrit, meaning good fortune. To this day, it is a sacred symbol in Indian and Asian cultures. In the 1930s, the German party reversed and adopted the swastika as an emblem of the Aryan race. Since the Holocaust, it remains associated with Nazism, neo-Nazis, anti-Semitism, white supremacism, or simply evil. Its use in some countries, including Germany, is prohibited by law, but not so in the United States. The Nazis expended considerable energy in indoctrinating the youth to their anti-Semitic platform. This book demonstrates how to recognize a Jew. The healthy Aryan farmer on the left is concentrated with the overweight, large-nosed Jew. Another page in the book, Jewish students and a Jewish teacher are expelled from school under Nazi law for the taunts of Aryan students. This book, printed in Germany in 1938, illustrates the Jew again with the big no as a toadstool, a symbol of decay. Another god of the Jews is money. A stereotypical Jewish stockbroker sits atop a bag of gold. The Nazis claim that the Jews commit the gravest crimes to get money. Another, the Jewish nose is bent. It looks like the number 6. A German student conducts a lesson on how to recognize the typical mythical Jewish nose. Let's look at Jewish migrations, Jewish immigration from the Pale of Settlement, 1880 to 1928. After the pogroms in 1881, over 2 million Jews left the area of the Russian Empire where Jews were allowed to reside, which today is Ukraine. By the time the immigration quotas in the United States were severely tightened in 1921, nearly 2 million Jews from the Russian Empire had made their home in the United States. For Jews, the U.S. was the golden Medina, a haven from persecution to seek opportunity. In this postcard, with the word America in Yiddish on her hat, she welcomes the exhausted immigrants. The 1913 Leo Frank case in Atlanta was a turning point for all American Jews who had fled Europe to escape anti-Semitism. Here in the United States, no Jew had been killed because they were Jewish until Leo Frank. This racially charged events surrounding the pencil factory murder of Mary Fagan were a result of the bigoted press that decided, in spite of other more credible suspects, that Jew was guilty of rape and murder and sentenced him to hang. Frank's lawyers asked for clemency from the government, who commuted the sentence to life in prison. Enraged, a citizen group lynched Leo Frank. This is the topic of the Broadway show Parade. Anti-Semitism and the depiction of Jews as different and not wanted led to discriminatory codes in real estate. This is Carl Fisher's deed for Miami Beach property in 1915. Jews are not considered of the Caucasian race, so are excluded from buying his properties. Carl Fisher was the primary developer of Miami Beach. There was much anti-Semitism in the United States in the 1920s. Notable was celebrated industrialist Henry Ford. He bought the Dearborn Independent and used it to publish and distribute free his series of 81 articles on the Jewish question in America, which he called the world's foremost problem. His ideas came directly from the protocols of the elders of Zion. Ford said the Jews were conspiring to destroy America by encouraging immigration and corrupting Christian morals. Many say the seeds of the Holocaust were sown and nurtured through Ford. Inspired by Ford's writings, Hitler had a photo of Ford on his wall and quoted him in Mein Kampf. Also, during this time, the Immigrant Act of 1921 and 24 closed America to Eastern European Jews. There were Jewish quotas in most universities and professional schools into the 1940s and later. In 1933, the Nazis gained strength in Germany, and anti-Semitic groups appear in the United States. In the late 1930s, Jewish immigration from Germany to the U.S. was the target of many anti-Semitic attacks. Printed in 1936, this image demonstrates Nazi sympathies by portraying repulsive Jews washing ashore with the tide. This was in Florida. At this time, Catholic priest Charles Coughlin denounced Jews on the radio to millions of United States people. On April 1st, 1933, the Nazi Party and its affiliates organized a nationwide boycott of Jewish-owned businesses in Germany. In Miami, Nazis put this sticker on the left on windows of Jewish-owned stores by 1938. Note the repulsive character of the Jew, with curly whiskers, exaggerated ears, and nose. This wartime poster depicts the Jewish domination of America, in particular New York City. The American Jew is portrayed as a communist by the five-pointed Soviet star on his breast. Strangely, anti-Semites also think the Jews are greedy capitalists. So how can it be both? Again, absurd. But of course, anti-Semitism makes no sense. Gentleman's agreement means an informal exclusion of Jews. The 1947 film Gentleman's Agreement was a stinging critique of the discriminatory policies of neighborhoods, resorts, and hotels, and hiring practice and controversial slurs such as kike. The villains are part of a gentleman's agreement to keep Jews in their place. Hotel brochures and advertising Gentile clientele were part of the gentleman's agreement. On Sunset Islands on Miami Beach, there were covenants recorded in 1948 that no lot can be sold, conveyed, or leased to anyone not a member in good standing with the neighborhood association. The hitch was that the neighborhood association excluded Jews. In 1959, the Supreme Court of Florida removed the restrictive covenant in the deed, stating that any attempt to prohibit property ownership because of race or religion was unconstitutional. This decision changed forever Florida practice of illegal restrictions against Jews owning land. This is a marketing brochure for Eleanor Village in Daytona Beach, Florida. In 1950, the resort had 300,000 brochures printed with restricted clientele. Rabbi Henry Okalika met with the owner, Mr. Eleanor, who admitted that he had never met a Jew before and initially refused to remove the offensive line, restricted clientele. After some creative pressure, Eleanor agreed to the policy change. The offensive phrase was blacked out, but Okalika thought this looked tacky and offered to personally pay 50% of the cost to reprint the brochure. After receiving the check from the rabbi, Mr. Eleanor reciprocated by donating that amount to the United Jewish Appeal, and new brochures were printed without the anti-Semitic language. In 1949, a Florida law had ended real estate and hotel restriction, so Rabbi Okalika was helping to enact the compliance. The racism that began with the church has raised its ugly head in various forms over time, and one is the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. Started after the Civil War, primarily targeting freed slaves, they expanded to include Jews. Samuel Fleischman had lived in Marianna from the 1840s, had a wife and children, was a respected hardware merchant in Marianna, which is in North Florida. In 1869, the KKK ordered him to leave town because he had defended blacks
Hi, I'm on a
spread
Zoom on my phone. I'll call you in a few.
and employment to freed slaves. Fleischman resisted, and when the KKK escorted him out of the city, he walked to the state capitol in Tallahassee and asked for protection. Getting none, he set out to return to his family. The next morning, his dead body, was found on the outskirts of the city. His assassins were never apprehended, but many people said KKK. Stormfront, launched here in Florida in 1995, is a white supremacist and neo-Nazi internet forum that was an internet's first major hate site. Imagine, created here in Florida, and has been linked to acts of murder and terror in the United States. With the internet and social media, the white supremacist cyber community has a much easier time spreading their message and recruiting new supporters to engage in the most destructive acts. This hatred extends in these times to Hollywood, California. On a 2022 Saturday Night Live opening monologue, a comedian, Dave Chappelle, trivialized anti Semitism and trash talks the Jews as a collective body. The audience laughed when he referred to Jewish control of the entertainment industry, a conspiracy theory. Jews created Hollywood by 1924, actually created Hollywood. Jews conceived the three major American TV networks. Yet there would be no movie industry. There would be no movie industry today without Jewish immigrant entrepreneurs. Yet this big, flashy movie museum opened in 2021 with no mention of these founders of the industry 100 years ago. This is anti-Semitism. After much criticism, there was a statement by the museum, quote, "We will be implementing changes immediately," end quote. And so the story of anti-Semitism continues to this day. This is why we have to respond with the facts to every anti-Semitic trope and conspiracy theory. American Jews meet the challenge of hatred on several fronts. Many are outspoken and have taken direct and personal action. They are woke, which actually means aware of and actively attentive to important facts and issues of discrimination, racial prejudice, and injustice. I'm proud to be woke. Jews rely on the power of education to dispel the dangers posed by ignorance and intolerance. At the beginning, I said that anti Semitism has been normalized and fashionable. We must work together to make it unfashionable again. Anti Semitism will never go away completely. The poster on the right is Art Spiegelman's statement that confronting hatred is an impossible and inescapable part of the Jewish condition, and reminder never to forget. From the top left, the ancient wandering Jew, to the Holocaust, where he depicts his parents as mice. They were Holocaust survivors. At a crossroads, it is the swastika, from which they cannot escape, and continuing into the next generation in America, where most Jews today feel unsafe. This book, scheduled for release in February, is based on Schumer's Jewish life experiences. He says, at its core, my book is a warning. If America fails to understand the context and history of anti Semitism, it will lead to violence against Jews and a rise in bigotry in our society at large. You know what you have to do. Speak out. If you are Jewish, be proud. Learn as much as you can about being Jewish and be proud of it. Know Jewish history. Know the facts to call out hate. Educate. Appeal to social media platforms to shut down extremists. Get involved in civic life. Have government officials call out hate over the long haul. And when they do, really important, say thank you. Thank them profusely. Build coalitions. We are too tiny a people, as I said in the beginning. We cannot do this alone. The Jewish community is too small. Over the past weekend, the new movie Wicked became the highest grossing movie based on a Broadway musical and a book. It is about two enemy witches who team up to fix a broken world. It was inspired by and warns against, it was inspired by fascism actually, and warns against anti-Semitism. If Wicked arouses us to do anything other than sing Stephen Schwartz's catchy tunes, it is to stand up for what is right, to resist prejudice in all its forms, and have the courage and pride to be your authentic self and speak out. Thank you so much for your time and sharing this with me.
Thank you so, so much, Dr. Zerivitz. That was so incredible. So much information. And I think we all really appreciate the way that you brought that currently into this exact moment. For anyone who hasn't seen Wicked, it was amazing. So I want to just open it up now for any questions, any thoughts that you have after the presentation, anything that you want any expansion on. Great. Larry and Kathy, go for it.
Hi, Marcia, thank you. That was a wonderful, expansive presentation, historically wonderful. And most of all, I want to thank you for the message to be a proud, educated Jew. That's fundamental. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your support.
I'd like to speak. This is Marla. I just want to thank my friend Marcia Joe for taking the time to do this for our community. This was such an important presentation and we learned so much. And I'm so glad you're allowing it to be on our website for other people to be able to share this information because it's so loaded with things. I couldn't absorb everything in one watching. So thank you so much, Marcia Joe.
Well, thanks to Rabbi Jacobs, you can watch the recording and watch it again and share it as many people as you can.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Amazing. Any questions?
I probably overloaded everybody.
Dr. Brown. Yeah, Dr. Brown, go for it. Please. If you can unmute yourself, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can't, I'm trying to get Marcia's face right. This is, my favorite thing to do here. Okay, I said speaker. I wanted to just thank you, Marcia, for sharing this beautiful story. And as a friend of Jonathan's and Jonathan Simon's I'm talking about, I know how proud he would be of you for sharing all of this, in addition to all the other wonderful things you collaborated with him. And it was so very meaningful. And as I look at the temple, the Jewish Museum, and I think about the long history and now the wonderful affiliation with FIU, I just know how proud he would be and how grateful he would be for keeping our story alive through your presentation. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Alexis.
Alexa.
Yes, thank you.
Beautiful. Any other questions or comments? I agree. I think I need to watch again as well. There was so much information to absorb. But in particular, I'll say as a new Floridian, learning about a lot of the pieces of Florida's history was particularly interesting and meaningful, and trying to understand how those pieces have been brought into the rhetoric today in the place where we live. So thank you so much. All right, thank you.
Email is on the screen. I just want to emphasize that people, please write me what's on your mind, response, thoughts. I love to hear from people. Thank you.
Beautiful. Well, thank you again so much to Marcia Joe for coming, Dr. Zerivitz, and sharing your presentation with us tonight. Thank you all so much for attending, for coming to learn. And this recording will be available. So if you want to watch it again, or if you want to pass it along to friends, we'll make sure that you all have access to it. So I want to thank you all for coming and hope you have a great night.
Happy Hanukkah, everybody.
And happy early Hanukkah. Yes. And everyone stay safe. Bye. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you, Rabbi, for your help.
Of course. Thank you. Thanks, Marla. Stop this.